Welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. We're studying 1 Thessalonians. This is the 18th installment. We're continuing on a thing called Do's and Don'ts. Last time, we saw that Paul completed his discussion on end times, and it was a means to encourage them and answer some questions about the Lord's return. And so we spent last time talking about Paul's letter beginning in verse 12 of chapter 5. Which followed this about the end times. He began writing to the Thessalonians a list of do's and don'ts. Paul is winding down his letter and has some advice he wants to give. So he begins his do's and don'ts with a list of things to do. Important things, essential things, healthy relationships among believers kind of information. And we identified two last time from these verses. Verse 12, now we ask you, brothers, to respect those who work hard among you, who are over you in the Lord, and who admonish you. Hold them in the highest regard and love because of their work. Live in peace with each other. So, we uncovered just two of the don'ts, the do's so far in those verses there. And those are, respect your spiritual leaders and promote peace. All right, so today, we come to four more do's from just one verse, and that's verse 14 of chapter 5. Let's look at that verse. And we urge you, brothers, warn those who are idle, encourage the timid, help the weak, be patient with everyone. So you can see how he's spelling them out, things to do. Notice Paul's wording here. He's not kindly requesting things here, like he did before, we ask you to do this. He's urging them and us to do these things. These are things urgently needed. Think of these as ongoing responsibilities all believers have toward one another. The first we have in verse 14 is, underline there, warn those who are idle. So, and we urge you, brothers, warn those who are idle. I use the New International Version regularly, and that's what I've been using here. And here the NIV, New International Version, translates the Greek as warn those who are idle. This is one of those English translations I was referring to last time where sometimes there's not agreement on the original Greek as the translations are done. Let me show you four popular translations, Bible translations, other than the New International Version for these words here, warn those who are idle. We have from the New Living, warn those who are lazy. From New American Standard, we have admonish the unruly. From New King James, we have warn those who are unruly. And then we have, in the New Revised Standard Version, admonish the idlers. So, that word translated warn is the same word translated admonish. And that's actually used, the same word is used a couple verses earlier in verse 12. No, verse 12 is where we're seeing, in verse 12. In the same chapter, chapter 5, where it said, now we ask you, brothers, to respect those who work hard among you, who are over you in the Lord, and who admonish you. Remember that word admonish from last time. That's that same word. It's translated here as warn, which is not a bad synonym, warn or admonish. Admonish kind of, to me, implies more correction. Warn is just like letting somebody know. Either way, it means confront them. Call them into account. I think admonish has that meaning. Tell him or her the truth in love, even if it's difficult for him or her to face it. So that's where we get admonish out of this, warn those who are idle. And then what is about this idle? That word translated idle comes from the Greek word ataktos. And the only occurrence is here and again in 2 Thessalonians. And it's translated idle, but how about unruly? Notice that there was unruly in New American Standard. There was unruly in New King James. Why unruly? How can you get... Those don't sound like synonyms, idle and unruly. According to the scholar Leon Morris, the word was a military term that originally referred to the soldier who was out of step or out of rank. That kind of unruliness. In that sense, unruly seems more fitting than idle. Undisciplined might be a good word. Disorderly might be a good word. And what happens to the soldier when they do that, when they're out of step or out of rank? They're admonished, right? They're instructed, or maybe warned. You could use that word warned, might work, if there is some weight behind it. Still, it seems strange to come up with such different translations. If the word unruly was more accurate, why didn't New American or New International Version use that? And then we have idle, and then we have New Revised had idlers, and we had laziness from New Living Translation. Okay, what is going on here? Then I happened upon this from a Greek translation. It was used in Greek society, according to the scholar, that word which is not translated idle or unruly. It was used in Greek society for those who did not show up for work. It was used in Greek society for those who did not show up for work. So apparently, some translators picked up on that use. Not showing up for work, being idle, being lazy. So I don't know if we can really know Paul's exact intentions on this one. Being concerned about those who are idle fits with chapter 4 of 1 Thessalonians in verse 11, where Paul wrote, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your hands, just as we told you." So you don't want to be idle, is what he's getting at. But unruliness could be cause for concern too. So here's my conclusion on this whole thing. Whether it's idleness or unruliness, it's not good for the person or the church family. It's the responsibility of other church family members to call them on it, to warn them about it, to admonish them, but to do it with gentleness, speaking in truth and love. So, maybe this could be the third do. I have it written there. Warn or instruct or admonish those who are idle or unruly or undisciplined or disorderly. So that's pretty wordy. And so I'm going to go with what I think was Paul's intention, but you might come to a different conclusion. I'm going to say the third do is to admonish the unruly. Admonish the unruly. Okay, spend enough time on that. What's the next do? We're following along here. We urge you, brothers, warn those who are idle, and now encourage the timid. And here you see I've written, encourage or comfort the faint-hearted. I'm steering away from the word timid. I don't like the word timid because of the connotation it has of being shy, shyness. That's not what's being covered here. The literal translation of what we see here as timid, what's translated as timid by New International Version, is short of soul. Short of soul. So several translations use the word faint-hearted. It's a term we don't use much, but I'm going to put it here, faint-hearted. What does faint-hearted really mean? Who are the faint-hearted? Those struggling under the weight of life's problems. Well then, I think we're all faint-hearted at some point in our lives, right? Those struggling under the weight of life's problems. Maybe they're emotionally, physically drained by worry and fear. That may describe you a little bit, or someone you know. They're lacking courage. They're discouraged instead of encouraged. They need to be encouraged or comforted. So how can you encourage a faint-hearted, a discouraged person? How can you comfort them? How can you encourage them? It might mean an affirming word, a smile, a shoulder to lean on. It might simply be our presence. Let them know someone cares. Think on that. Encourage. What does that mean to you? Encourage or comfort the faint-hearted. Those who are struggling. Okay. Keeping on here. Next one is help the weak. Help the weak. From that, I'm suggesting the fifth do as help the spiritually weak or weakened. I'll tell you why I brought up weakened also. Paul's not referring to the physically weak here, right? Is he? I see them as the faint-hearted that we talked about just a minute ago, who have plunged down even deeper. These would be the exhausted or burned out folks, those who don't have the spiritual or mental strength to handle each day. So what may have suffered the most in their lives, where they are weak, is their faith. For many, their faith is new and unprepared for hard times. Just like these Thessalonians and First Thessalonians, their faith was new, and maybe they weren't prepared for certain things. But even seasoned believers may find their faith weakened by trials. Let's keep that in mind. So that's why I added the spiritually weakened. So help the spiritually weakened as well as help the spiritually weak. So even those who have their faith, they might run into periods of time where their faith is weakened. What can we do? The literal translation we see as help the weak is hold fast to the weak. Hold fast is that word, help. Hold fast to the weak. In other words, don't let them fall. Prop them up with the same kinds of things to do for the faint-hearted. Support them, but do it even more so. And then we get to be patient with everyone. Be patient with everyone. He's urging them to be patient with everyone. Literally means be long-tempered. That's another phrase we don't use. Have a long fuse. Be long-tempered. Have a long fuse. Avoid becoming irritable or restless or even angry. Instead, he's suggesting, he's asking, he's admonishing, he's urging, remain calm. Be patient with everyone. Notice that. Be patient with everyone. So that's referring to the people that he's talking about earlier here, the idle, the unruly, the faint-hearted, the spiritually weak. Be patient with everyone. But also everyone we encounter. Not just believers, which these other ones are about believers, but this, when he gets into with everyone, can include non-believers. So a good rule to use is similar to the golden rule, which would be patient to others as you'd like them to be patient with you. So finally we come to perhaps the hardest one, verse 15. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, which brings the command, refuse to retaliate. Refuse to retaliate. Might be the hardest verse to apply. Don't pay back wrong for wrong. Don't repay evil for evil. Jesus himself had something to say about this in Matthew. Can you see that? It's a little smaller. You have heard, Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So, that's Jesus saying, refuse to retaliate. Now, this almost sounds like it's a don't, right? A don't snuck in there among all the do's. But it really is a do, which is to refuse doing that. And also, there's more to this verse. I think adds to the do part of it. But always, part I've underlined here, but always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. But always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. So the full command would be more like this. Refuse to retaliate, do good instead. Be kind, be good, not just to your fellow followers of Jesus. Here it says you're also to be kind to everyone. There's even more of the everyone than the last time we talked about everyone. This is be kind to each other, meaning fellow believers, and to everyone else. That would be those who aren't fellow believers, strangers, even enemies. In fact, Jesus said a few verses later than the one we talked about from Matthew, where he said, "You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person." He then says in verse 43, this would be Matthew chapter 5, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Now that's a tall order there. That is a tall order. So when he says to everyone else, be kind to everyone else, this would include our enemies and those who persecute us. This is very hard. It would take effort to avoid payback. But offering goodness to that person, even though it seems impossible at times, look at what, a little closer here. Notice the word try there. But always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. Maybe it's easier to it doesn't take a lot of effort for fellow believers. Be kind to those who are kind to us. But make every effort, even for our enemy, even for those who persecute us. Try. Okay. That's all we can do is really try. It's going to be rough sometimes to not want to retaliate. So, let's just look at this. Let's look at the do's together. The ones we pulled from just a few verses from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 12 through 15 this week and last week. So things kindly requested are to respect your spiritual leaders and promote peace. Things urgently needed are to admonish the unruly, encourage or comfort the faint-hearted, help the spiritually weak or weakened, be patient with everyone, and refuse to retaliate. Do good instead. A lot to think about. And this isn't the end of his do's and don'ts. And we'll continue with that next time. So in the meantime, take care, and may the Lord be with you.